Have you ever bought a plant, brought it home, and then watched it die slowly? It wasn't because you didn't care, but because you just didn't know what it needed. See, a lot of people's social lives are just like that. They want a relational life that feels alive, a garden full of connection and color. But instead, their days feel muted and gray, and they think it's their fault. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Loneliness isn't a personality flaw. It's a developmental gap. Just like gardening, building connection is something you learn, or should have learned. The problem is, most of us were never taught by our parents, teachers, society, how to actually develop these skills. So we grew up confused, anxious, and blaming ourselves for something no one taught us how to do. But now as an adult, you have a chance. If you really want to learn how to build meaningful relationships, you have to take a developmental approach. And today, I'm going to walk you through a developmental framework that humans use to learn any complex skill. It's called the conscious competent model. It has 4 stages, and it's an extremely useful map because once you know which stage you're in, you'll understand why you've been stuck. And instead of the confusion, the frustration, the shame, you'll have clarity on what actions to take in order to move forward. By the way, I'm Shu, and for most of my life, I struggle with loneliness. But for the past 15 years, I've devoted myself to studying psychology, spirituality, and communication. And today, my social life is thriving. And I want to share with you everything I've learned so that you can save some time and heartache. All right, back to the framework. In the conscious competent model, stage 1 is called unconscious incompetent. You don't know what you don't know. In other words, ignorance. Not in a derogatory sense. In mindfulness and in Buddhism, ignorance simply means not seeing clearly, and becoming aware of it is what begins the path forward. And in chronic loneliness, that ignorance actually shows up in 2 forms. The first is unintentional ignorance. Here, the underlying belief is that social connection is a nice to have, but not a core human need. And in some ways, that belief makes sense. If you grew up in a household where your parents were focused on survival or upward mobility, pushing you toward academic or career success, then of course that's where you put your energy. That was true for me as well. The problem is, when you're in this stage, you don't realize the value of having strong connections in your life. You don't have modeling for healthy relationships, and you don't know how to detect the early warning signs of loneliness. You simply don't notice what you're missing until it's too late and you're really struggling. Using the plant metaphor, it's like waiting until the leaves are brown before realizing something's wrong, because you didn't know to check the soil in the first place, just inexperience. The second form of ignorance is more subtle and often more painful. This is when a part of you does sense the loneliness, but another part of you learned long ago that reaching out isn't safe. For many people, this begins in childhood. If you grew up with parents who were emotionally unstable, unavailable, or unpredictable, then needing connection may have felt risky. You might have learned that your feelings were too much, your needs weren't welcome, affection was inconsistent, or vulnerability led to disappointment. So your system protected you the only way it knew how. It shut the need down. And for men, this pattern gets reinforced culturally. We're taught, handle it on your own. Don't be needy. Don't talk about your feelings. Be strong. Be self-sufficient. So even as an adult, when loneliness shows up, a protective part steps in and says, no, I'm fine. I don't need anyone. I'll focus on my work. Or, I don't want to bother people. I'm better off on my own. It's armor. It's a strategy that once kept you safe, but now keeps you disconnected. It's about not seeing the need, because for years, seeing it would have meant hurt. Regardless of how the ignorance happened, the outcome is the same. You don't yet see connection as a skill. You don't see the system behind it, and you don't understand why things aren't working. Then something in life cracks the illusion. A breakup, a move, a birthday alone, or as simple as a quiet Sunday afternoon. And suddenly, you have one honest thought. Okay, something's missing, and I don't know how to fix it. And that moment is the beginning of the transition to stage 2. Stage 2 is called conscious incompetence. You finally know you're lonely, but you don't yet know how to create the connections that you want. You've acknowledged you have a problem, but you don't know how to solve it. And this is where most people get stuck for years, even decades. See if any of this sounds like your life. You want better relationships, whether it's friendships, a romantic partner, interactions at the workplace, or better communication with your family and a sense of belonging in your communities. And you start trying things. You go to a meetup, you dress better, you grind harder at the gym, you try pop psychology. And some of these things work for a moment, a conversation here, a spark there, a night out that feels promising. But here's where the illusion breaks. It doesn't compound. It doesn't lead anywhere meaningful because those strategies are only surface level solutions. So you only get surface level improvements. Here's the real truth. You're not actually learning because you have no system. You have no feedback loop. You have no fundamentals. No understanding what's actually happening internally or relationally. It's like searching brown leaves on my plant, and the first Google result says, add water. But as any gardener knows, brown leaves can mean overwatering, underwatering, wrong soil, wrong light, pests, nutrient imbalance. Without understanding the system, you're just guessing. And that's where things get even trickier. A lot of advice you find from the internet, from friends, even from therapists, can unintentionally keep you stuck if it's not connected to a larger relational framework. And this isn't because therapists don't know what they're doing. Therapy is incredibly helpful for healing, regulation, and insight. But therapy sessions often get pulled into week-to-week emotional cleanup. Stress from work, family conflict, anxiety spikes, burnout, which means there's usually very little time left for systemic relational skill building. So you end up with valuable insights, but not the full structure you need to actually build a relational life that works. And here's a modern trap that almost everyone is falling into now. AI. AI is making everything worse. People are asking AI for relational advice, but the advice often ends up reinforcing their distortions. You know, the sycophancy, it just tells you what you want to hear. Because if your perception of the situation is biased, then the input you feed into the AI will be biased. And then the advice it gives you back won't align with what's actually happening in the relationship. Going back to our plants metaphor, in nature, some plants follow cycles you can't see unless you understand them. A pear tree drops all of its leaves in the winter. An orchid sheds its flowers and sits bare for months. And if you didn't know that was a natural rhythm, you might ask the AI, why is my plant dying? And the AI, doing its best with incomplete information, will confidently but incorrectly give you advice that is totally wrong. Because your diagnosis was off, so the solution is off. And now you're heading in the completely wrong direction. That's exactly what happens with relational advice. If you don't understand the full relational system, your patterns, skills, fears, history, environment, and everything that has to do with the other person, then the guidance you seek, no matter how smart the source, won't match what's actually happening inside you. And that mismatch creates even more confusion. You start wondering why you're doing all the right things, but nothing is landing. You start feeling frustrated because other people make this look so easy. And this is where it gets really painful. Eventually, that frustration becomes shame. Every failed attempt reinforces the old belief. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And that confusion and shame loop is what keep people stuck in stage 2. You're trying, you care, you put in the effort, but there's no roadmap, there's no feedback and no support. So you spin. And that's why stage 2 hurts so much. If you're in stage 2, you're not failing. You're learning without a framework. And the moment you recognize that, something finally clicks. You don't need to push harder. You don't need more tips. You don't need to change your personality. You need guidance, structure, and a safe environment to practice in. The same way anyone learns any complex skill. And that's why I created my relational integration program. It's a structured, supportive container where you can finally stop guessing and start growing with clarity. You learn the full relational system. You practice the actual skills. You get real-time feedback. You understand your patterns, and you build habits and environments that sustain connection. It's the place where people finally move out of stage 2 into real, sustainable relational growth. If you're curious about whether it might help you, there's a link below to book a short discovery call. Just a conversation to see where you are and whether the program fits your goals. All right, let's talk about stage 3, because this is where things actually start to change. Stage 3 is called conscious competence. For the first time, you're learning with structure. And this is the turning point where things really start to click. You're no longer treating connection like luck or personality or something other people are simply born with. You finally understand it for what it is: a skill, a system, a set of patterns that can be learned, practiced, and refined. And because you now have a framework, a map of how relational life actually works, you can begin practicing intentionally instead of just guessing. So there are 3 pillars. The first is the self, where everything begins. You're learning to name what's happening inside you, your emotions, your needs, your nervous system responses. You can notice the moment you start to shut down, the part of you that wants to please, the part of you that wants to run, and the part that panics when things get intimate. And instead of getting swept up in those reactions, you're beginning to lead from self, the grounded, centered, capital S self, inside you that can pause, breathe, choose, and respond. This is the foundation of stage 3. Your internal world becomes clearer, and clarity creates choice. But internal clarity isn't enough on its own. The second pillar, relationships, is where practice comes in. This is where you begin building the abilities you were never taught growing up. Listening with presence, offering empathy, expressing vulnerability, setting boundaries, asking for support, saying no, saying yes, and repairing conflict without guilt or shame. Okay, pay attention, because something magical happens here. Because you now understand the system of relationships, every interaction becomes a learning moment. You go out in the world, you try something. Maybe you fumble, maybe you freeze, but instead of spiraling, you treat the moment as data, because now you have a map to put a pin where that happened. What happened there? What took over? What skill was missing? What would I try next time? Mistakes stop being proof that there's something wrong with you, and instead they become feedback, and feedback becomes growth. Okay, now we zoom out to the bigger picture and the last pillar, your lifestyle and environment. This is where alignment starts to matter. You look at the places you spend your time, your communities, your hobbies, your routines, your work. You begin making small shifts towards environments that nourish connection instead of draining it. By building rhythms that keep relationships alive instead of accidental, your lifestyle starts to reinforce your growth instead of contradicting it. So whereas stage 2 was a cycle that kept you stuck in confusion and shame, stage 3 is a cycle that keeps you growing. It's where connection stops feeling like a mystery and starts feeling like a skill you can actually build. And this momentum, this forward motion, that's what carries you into stage 4, when connection finally starts to feel natural and your relational life begins to sustain itself. Stage 4 is called unconscious competence, the stage where connection finally feels natural, not effortless, but no longer fragile. Your basic connection needs are met here, not in a forced way, not through strategy, but because your relational life has grown real roots. You now have people you can call when you're struggling, people who check in on you just because they care, and relationships where you feel seen, valued, and understood for just being you. You're interwoven into the social fabric of your communities, the places where you go where people know your name, where your presence matters, where you feel a sense of belonging without having to earn it. And the beautiful part is you're contributing to. There's a genuine give and take. You're someone who others reach out to. Not because you're performing, not because you're trying to be impressive, but because your presence feels grounding to them. Your advice lands, your energy feels safe, your friendships feel reciprocal. Relating becomes energizing instead of draining. You naturally gravitate towards environments that feed your soul, spaces where you feel aligned with your values, your identity, your inner world. And the people around you reflect that back to you. There's no manipulation, no tallying who did what, no subtle bitterness or fear or pretense. Just connection that feels clean, integrity-based, mutual, and alive. You're no longer scanning for rejection or micromanaging your behavior. Your system has learned it's safe to be yourself. And the biggest shift of all is this. You're not trying to do connection anymore. You're simply living in a way where connection happens naturally. This doesn't mean you never feel lonely again. Life still brings season of winter and summer. But the difference is you understand the rhythm. You know how to reconnect. You know how to repair. You know how to rebuild because you've put in the reps to build the skills. So if you're somewhere in this journey, whether you're just beginning to realize something's missing, or you've been stuck in stage 2 for a long time, or you're in stage 3 and finally starting to see movement, I want you to know something important. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're developing. And development takes time, structure, and support, just like any complex skill. And if you want support in that process, in learning the system, in practicing the skills, in building the habits and environments that make connection sustainable, that's what my relational integration program is for. It's a structured relational training environment designed to help you move through these stages with clarity, not alone, not guessing, not spinning, but with guidance, feedback, and a community of people on the same path of development. If you're curious whether it might be a good fit for you, there's a link below to book a short discovery call. It's just a conversation to understand where you are and whether this kind of structured training is the support you're looking for. Wherever you are on this journey, I hope this video helped you name your stage, understand your patterns, and feel a little less alone in the process. And I hope you keep tending to your relational life the way you would tend to a garden, patiently, consistently, and with the belief that growth is always possible. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.